She doesn't belong here." That's what he barked across the showroom, loud enough for every diamond-staring guest to hear, loud enough to humiliate her not just as a customer, but as a black woman. He didn't whisper it. He didn't sugarcoat it. He made sure it landed like a slap in the middle of his luxury boutique, a space dripping in chandeliers and ego. She had asked to see a jade necklace. He responded by signaling security. And just like that, the room decided who she was, without knowing anything about her. They saw her skin before her smile, her coat before her card, her silence before her story. But what they didn't see, what none of them even considered, was who she really was, and what would happen when the truth finally walked through the same door she'd just been kicked out of. This wasn't just racism. It was arrogance, unfiltered, unchallenged, and about to be exposed on a scale no one inside that showroom could have imagined. Still with us? Good. Then don't scroll. Hit that like, subscribe for more stories that start with injustice and end with reckoning, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what do you think they should have done instead? Holbrook & Company wasn't just any jewelry store. It was a sanctuary of polished opulence nestled in one of Manhattan's most exclusive shopping districts. The floors were imported marble, the walls a soft gray silk, and the lighting was designed to make diamonds dance. Behind the main counter stood Richard Holbrook himself, owner and self-declared guardian of the Holbrook legacy. He wore a navy pinstripe suit, his silver tie knotted with mathematical precision. His hair was perfectly parted, and his movements were smooth, calculated, practiced. He knew what luxury was supposed to look like, and more importantly, he believed he knew who deserved to be surrounded by it. That's why, when the glass doors opened at exactly 11:07 a.m. and Amara Ellis stepped inside, Richard's smile froze for half a second. She wasn't what he expected. She wore no jewelry, no designer logos, no elaborate heels or loud perfume. Just dark jeans, a beige wool coat, and a pair of calm, observant eyes. Richard didn't move from his spot, but with a subtle tilt of his head, he signaled to a junior staffer, a silent cue they all understood. Keep an eye on her. The assistant nodded and began pacing the floor casually behind Amara, pretending to rearrange a display. Amara, meanwhile, was unbothered. She walked gracefully, deliberately, as though every step she took had purpose. Her eyes didn't dart around nervously like those of someone out of place. Instead, she studied each display as though she had seen better. Eventually, she paused in front of a specific piece. An emerald jade necklace, encased in a rounded crystal display. The jade was rich, vibrant, cut into soft curves and laced with delicate golden vines and rare yellow diamonds. It wasn't flashy, but it radiated elegance and power. Amara leaned slightly forward, and without turning around, she spoke clearly, calmly. "Excuse me, could I see this one up close?" Richard finally stepped forward, placing both hands lightly on the counter. He didn't smile. He didn't welcome her. He just looked her over, from her coat to her shoes, and back up to her face. "That necklace," he said slowly, "is part of a private auction collection, not available for general browsing." Amara's brow lifted. "Is it not for sale?" Richard's voice remained steady, but his tone carried layers of dismissal. "Technically, yes. But we only show certain pieces to serious clients, collectors who understand its provenance." Amara gave a small, polite nod. "I'd still like to see it, please." Richard shook his head, and now a small smirk crept to the edge of his mouth. "We have a lovely essentials collection in the back. Some beautiful studs and pendant sets. Might be more suitable, more accessible." The word echoed like an insult, though he had spoken it softly. Amara didn't flinch. Her expression didn't change. She simply looked at the necklace again and replied, "This is the one I asked about." That answer didn't please him. He straightened his back, his voice sharpening just slightly. "As I said, that's not an item we pull out for every walk-in." Then, without another word, he turned his attention back to a clipboard behind the counter, as if the conversation had ended. Amara stood in silence for a few moments, her eyes locked on the necklace, not on him. The assistant still trailed nearby, pretending to dust a shelf, pretending not to listen. A middle-aged woman in the back of a store glanced over, and then whispered something to her husband. They both chuckled quietly. The message was clear, and everyone had received it. Richard Holbrook had decided exactly who Amara was and exactly what she wasn't. And in his world, that meant the conversation was over. But what he didn't realize, not even for a second, was that it had just begun. Amara was none of those things. She was calm, confident, and quiet, and that dissonance irritated him. With a flick of his wrist, Richard beckoned the assistant closer. "Pull the Valencia collection from the main floor," he murmured just loud enough. "We don't want that section too exposed." The assistant hesitated for half a second, then nodded and began discreetly removing the glass cases that housed the store's most exclusive pieces. As Amara continued to browse, she noticed the quiet rearrangement around her. No one addressed her directly, but the shift was obvious. The sparkle and opulence of the premium displays were literally being rolled away the moment she approached them. She said nothing, kept her eyes forward, but her lips pressed slightly tighter together. Not 2 minutes later, the bell above the entrance chimed again, and in walked a white couple, middle-aged, casually dressed, the man in a wrinkled golf polo and khakis, the woman in a zip-up fleece and flats. They looked like they had wandered in from a brunch line rather than a luxury showroom. Richard's demeanor changed instantly. His posture straightened, his face brightened, and he stepped around the counter with exaggerated charm. "Good afternoon, sir, madam," he said with a warmth he hadn't come close to using with Amara. "Welcome to Holbrook & Company. May I offer you a glass of our house champagne while you browse?" The couple smiled, surprised by the VIP treatment. "Oh, wow, sure," the man said, chuckling. "Didn't expect that." "Nonsense," Richard said with a grin. "You're our guests. Please, have a seat. Let me bring over something I think you'll love." Within seconds, a staffer rolled out a leather-upholstered bench for them and poured flutes of champagne, placing them gently on a mirrored tray. The couple settled in comfortably, while Richard presented them with a tray of rings from the very collection he had just ordered removed when Amara stood nearby. From her position near the opposite display, Amara saw the entire exchange unfold. She observed how the energy in the room shifted, how the smiles came quickly for some and cautiously for others, and how luxury was offered freely to those deemed worthy without question. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask for champagne or demand fairness. Instead, she watched, quietly absorbing every detail: the selective hospitality, the performative grace, the smiling cruelty of being politely excluded. It wasn't her first time in a space that looked pristine on the surface, but rotted underneath. One of the staffers passed by her again, this time with a velvet-lined case that had just been in the front display. The tray was now headed for the back room. He paused, catching her gaze for a split second, and she saw it, the awkward recognition, the flicker of guilt before he looked away and kept walking. Richard, meanwhile, was now laughing with the new couple, gesturing toward a pair of diamond cufflinks, as if they held ancient secrets. "These are part of our Swiss limited series," he said, his voice rich with pride. "Only 6 sets made globally, and I think they pair wonderfully with your style." The man nodded appreciatively while sipping the champagne. "You know," he said, "we were just walking by, didn't think we'd find anything." Richard chuckled. "Sometimes the right people find us, not the other way around." The subtext lingered in the air, bitter and undeniable. Amara took one final look at the jade necklace, now dimmed under the adjusted lighting, and then stepped away from the case. She made her way toward the far end of the store, pretending to examine a display of mid-tier earrings. Her movements were slow and graceful, not because she was unsure of herself, but because she was thinking, recording every insult, every double standard, every false smile. She didn't need to shout to be seen. She needed only to wait. She stopped in front of a new display, an arrangement of diamond bracelets laid on navy velvet. The craftsmanship was intricate, delicate latticework of platinum and brilliant cut stones arranged like frost spun into metal. For a brief moment, her hand lifted slightly, a silent signal to the nearby associate, a young woman named Lily, who had just joined Holbrook & Company a few months earlier. Lily noticed the gesture and approached quickly, her expression professional but open. "Would you like to try one on?" she asked politely. her voice gentle, genuinely kind. Amara gave her a small, appreciative nod. "Yes, that one," she said, pointing to a bracelet with interlocking diamond motifs. Lily reached for the case key with instinctive ease, but before she could unlock the glass, Richard's voice cut through the air like a cold blade. "Leave it, Lily," he said sharply from across the showroom. His tone held no room for confusion, and it turned several heads, including that of the champagne-sipping couple still seated nearby. Lily hesitated, clearly startled, unsure if she had misunderstood. "Sir?" she asked softly, still holding the key. Richard strode across the showroom with deliberate slowness, every step echoing his authority. He didn't glance at Lily. His eyes were fixed on Amara, and when he spoke, his words were loud enough for all to hear. "There's no need to waste time pulling out items she won't be buying." Amara didn't blink. Her expression remained neutral, almost amused, as if she had expected this moment all along. But Lily visibly stiffened. "Sir, she just wanted to. I know what she wants," Richard snapped, finally turning to face the younger woman, his voice biting. "This isn't some museum. We don't open cases for browsers playing dress-up." Lily's lips parted slightly in shock, but no words came. A couple standing at a nearby earring display exchanged glances, the tension unmistakable. Amara stepped back from the case slowly and folded her arms. Her posture was composed, but her presence suddenly felt larger, heavier, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Richard turned back to her, brushing invisible lint from his jacket sleeve with theatrical precision. "People walk in here all the time thinking they're in Rodeo Drive window shopping. They see the lights, the glass, the shine, and think it's all just for show. It's not. This is serious merchandise. Real clients understand that." Lily stood frozen beside the case, her face a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. She had been trained to treat every guest with respect, but now she was being taught something else entirely, something unspoken but loud. Who counted? And who didn't? Richard wasn't finished. "You should visit our Fifth Avenue branch," he said with a sneer. "They have lovely catalog pieces, less risk, less confusion." The insult wasn't just in the words, it was in the tone, the public nature of the dismissal, the assumption that Amara wasn't worthy even of silent consideration. The seated couple didn't comment, but the man chuckled under his breath, clearly entertained. Amara looked at Richard now, not with anger, not with defensiveness, but with an unreadable calm. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to determine whether he was serious or simply afraid of what he didn't recognize. Lily took a quiet breath, stepped away from the case, and walked toward the side of the room, visibly shaken. Richard adjusted his tie, straightened his cufflink, and returned to the couple as though nothing had occurred. "Apologies for the interruption," he said smoothly. "Now, where were we?" But the air had changed. Even the lights seemed colder. Amara took 2 steps away from the bracelet display and then paused, her eyes scanning the room. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low but firm, and though she said only one sentence, it cut through the silence with precision. Amara, meanwhile, didn't retreat. She remained composed, though anyone watching closely would sense that she was no longer simply observing. She was calculating. She moved deliberately toward the register counter, bypassing the mid-tier displays, her gaze no longer drifting idly. With a calmness that unsettled even those who had initially dismissed her, Amara reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a slim, matte black card holder. She laid it gently on the glass countertop and withdrew a single card from inside. Heavy, glossy, jet black, edged with platinum foil. It bore no numbers, no logos, only a subtle chip, and her name embossed in silver, Amara L. Ellis. A Centurion card, the kind whispered about in elite circles. The kind most luxury associates never touched, let alone swiped. Richard noticed the movement, but didn't approach right away. He finished his conversation with the couple from earlier, laughing lightly as he handed them a branded catalog and a final sip of champagne. But when he turned and saw the card on the counter, his expression faltered for just a moment, a flicker of discomfort passing over his otherwise sculpted composure. He walked over, his pace slower now, his smile thinner, tighter. "May I help you?" he asked, Though the tone hadn't changed much, it was still coated in arrogance, though now tinged with curiosity. "I'd like to make a purchase," Amara said simply. "You may not have let me try it on, but I'd like the bracelet. The one with the latticework diamonds. I assume it's still available." Richard hesitated, then forced a smile. "That piece is not exactly entry-level," he said carefully. "It's priced at—" "I'm aware of the price," she replied, her tone neutral. "And I'm prepared to pay it." She pushed the card forward. Richard picked it up and inspected it, then let out a short, dismissive laugh. "These things are all over eBay now," he said with a smirk. "People get them made just to impress. No way to know if it's even real anymore." His voice was louder now, deliberately so, carrying across the showroom like a public announcement. A few customers looked up from their shopping, sensing the escalation. "Is that so?" Amara asked, her voice still calm. "Perhaps you'd prefer to check with your merchant system." Richard narrowed his eyes, then turned to the register. He slid the card through the terminal with visible skepticism, almost hoping it would decline, almost needing it to. But the beep that followed was clear and immediate, approved. The register screen glowed a soft green. The sale was valid. The card was real. And Richard, for a moment, stood frozen. The silence was thicker than ever. No one moved. Even the staff held their breath. But instead of apologizing or acknowledging his mistake, Richard scoffed again, his ego too bruised to fold. "Some people," he muttered, not directly to her but loud enough, "will do anything for attention." Then, without warning, he leaned toward the security console behind the counter and pressed the discreet button that summoned the in-store guard. Seconds later, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a gray uniform appeared from a back room. "Yes, sir?" he asked. Richard pointed toward Amara, without meeting her eyes. "I need you to escort this customer outside. We're done here. She's disrupting the environment for our other clients." "I'm sorry," the guard blinked confused. "She just made a purchase." "I'm aware," Richard snapped. "But she's not the kind of shopper this store is designed for. She's causing discomfort. Just do it." The guard hesitated. He looked at Amara, who hadn't moved. Her hands were folded gently in front of her, her expression perfectly controlled. She met his eyes calmly, without fear, without resistance. "Ma'am," the guard said, his voice low and unsure, "I'm going to have to ask you to what?" she said, softly but firmly. "To leave because I paid with the wrong skin tone? Or because I didn't come in wearing diamonds the size of your ego?" A sharp intake of breath echoed from somewhere near the earring counter. Someone gasped. Richard flushed red. "That's enough," he growled. "You're done here." He believed he had reasserted control, reclaimed the atmosphere he curated so obsessively. He straightened his cufflinks, gave a dismissive nod to the security guard who lingered awkwardly by the door, and turned back toward his staff, ready to restore the tone of his establishment. "Let that be a lesson," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "We serve clients, not pretenders." One of the junior associates near the back, a young man named Evan, dressed sharply in a navy vest and tie, barely in his second month on the job, shifted uneasily on his feet. He had watched the entire scene unfold in disbelief, and now something inside him broke through the surface. His voice trembled slightly, but held firm as he spoke. "Sir, with all due respect, that wasn't right." Richard paused mid-step. His eyes snapped to Evan like a hawk catching sudden movement in a still field. "What did you say?" Evan straightened his back, visibly nervous, but unwilling to swallow what he had just witnessed. "That customer didn't do anything wrong. She was polite, she had a valid card, she made a purchase, and you humiliated her, publicly. That's not how we're trained to treat anyone." The room went still again. All eyes turned to Richard, whose face went blank for a beat before narrowing into a smile that chilled the air. "Trained," he echoed, taking a step closer to the young man. "You've been here, 7 weeks? You think you know more about my business than I do." Evan swallowed, but didn't back down. "I think I know enough to recognize when someone's being profiled. And that wasn't just about customer policy. That was personal." Richard's eyes narrowed further. "Watch your tone." "Why?" Evan shot back. "Because I'm beneath you too?" That final sentence cracked the thin shell of civility Richard had maintained. He stepped forward, his voice no longer cold but burning. "You're fired." The word landed like a gunshot. Customers flinched. Lily, standing nearby, gasped audibly. "Get out," Richard continued, pointing toward the exit. "Pack your things and get out of my store." Evan didn't move at first. He looked around the room, at the staff who dared not speak, at the customers who pretended to check their watches, and then back at Richard. "I hope she tells the world," he said softly. "Because this place, this name you worship, it's not what you think it is anymore." Then he turned, walked to the back room in silence, and disappeared through the employee hallway. Richard stood frozen, face flushed, lips pressed into a tight line. He adjusted his suit jacket with 2 quick tugs, then looked toward the customers with a forced chuckle. "Apologies for the drama," he said, trying to smooth over the rupture. Some people clearly let emotion override professionalism. But the mood had shifted. The air was different now, heavy with tension and the unmistakable feeling of something unraveling. A middle-aged woman at the center display quietly set down the ring she had been admiring. Another customer subtly walked toward the exit. The charm Richard wielded like a blade was dulling by the second. Yet he refused to acknowledge it. He poured himself a glass of sparkling water from the customer bar, took a long sip, and returned to his desk as though nothing had happened. But from the mezzanine level above, a discreet camera embedded in the wall, part of the boutique's high-end surveillance system, continued to record. It had captured everything. The mocking words, the unjustified expulsion, the firing, the smug expressions that now looked more like evidence than power. And unbeknownst to Richard, that footage wasn't just feeding into internal security. The room, though returned to motion, no longer pulsed with luxury and confidence. It felt colder, heavier, as if something irreversible had taken place. Then, as if summoned by some invisible cue, the boutique door opened again. The elegant chime above the entrance echoed through the showroom as Amara stepped back in. She walked with the same composed poise, her gaze steady, unfazed by the spectacle she had just been subjected to. Her return was not defiance, it was declaration. A few customers turned in surprise. One woman actually stepped aside instinctively, unsure of what to expect. Richard, seated now at his desk, blinked twice in disbelief, then stood slowly, eyes narrowing. "You've got to be joking," he muttered, and then louder, "We've already had this discussion, Miss Ellis, was it?" Amara didn't respond. Instead, she pulled out her phone, this time not to text or document, but to place a video call. Richard's eyes caught the glint of her screen as she lifted it and positioned it in front of her. "Oh, fantastic," he said sarcastically, his tone dripping with scorn. "What now? You calling Yelp? Instagram Live? Want to post a dramatic exit for your 5 followers?" He took a few exaggerated steps forward, sneering. "Or is it your Uber driver? Maybe your sugar daddy, coming to save the day in his leased BMW?" His laugh was loud and biting, the kind meant to entertain nearby customers and reduce his target to a punchline. The cruelty in his words was unmistakable, and for the first time, even some of the more passive customers flinched. Lily, still behind the counter, looked visibly horrified but said nothing, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the glass display. Amara remained still, unmoved, her phone held at eye level. A moment later, a clear male voice rang from the screen, refined, composed, and unmistakably authoritative. "Princess, has the consultation begun?" the voice asked. Richard froze at the word, princess. The sound alone seemed to dull the edge of his arrogance. Amara responded calmly, "Not yet. I've been delayed. But I'm ready now." Richard blinked, lips parted. But before he could interject, the outside world entered the boutique again. A sleek black Maybach came to a silent stop just outside the store, its metallic frame gleaming beneath the late morning sun. The engine barely whispered as it powered down. The store's wide glass facade allowed every customer and employee to witness its arrival. From the driver's seat stepped a tall, uniformed chauffeur in a sharply pressed suit bearing a gold emblem on the lapel, a Chant Royal House. He moved with practiced efficiency and opened the rear passenger door with military precision. Richard turned his head toward the entrance, now visibly unsettled. The chauffeur stepped inside, calm and deliberate, his voice resonating across the showroom with clarity and formality. "Excuse me," he announced, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Amara. "I'm here to escort Her Highness, Princess Amara of the Ashant royal lineage, to her design consultation. Has the selection process been completed?" The room went completely still. It was as if time paused, as if the diamonds in the cases stopped catching light, as if the air itself held its breath. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His face drained of color. Several customers stared wide-eyed. A few gasped quietly, hands covering mouths. Lily nearly dropped a pen she had been clutching. Amara stepped forward slightly, lowering her phone. "Thank you, Malik," she said with a gentle smile. "I was just about to leave." The chauffeur nodded, turned to the center of the boutique, and then added with distinct professionalism, "Our royal delegation is waiting outside. We appreciate the store's hospitality." The word landed like a bullet, cloaked in velvet. Amara turned to Richard, not with anger, not with contempt, but with cool, unshakable dignity. "That phone call." Outside, the curbside had transformed into something out of a diplomatic event. Another black SUV idled behind the Maybach, and just beyond the corner, discreet men in tailored suits with encrypted earpieces stood beside polished sedans, their eyes constantly scanning the street. But it wasn't security that held Richard's breath hostage. It was the one sentence that still echoed inside his mind: Princess Amara of the Ashant royal lineage. Richard had built his business on connections, exclusivity, whispers of royalty, and clientele lists guarded tighter than most vaults. The Ashant name wasn't just familiar, it was legendary. They were one of Africa's wealthiest and most respected royal dynasties, known for their discretion, power, and relentless precision in choosing business partners. Now that name had just walked out of his door under his insult, carrying with her the gravitas of a decision yet to be finalized. Malik paused briefly at the open door and turned back inside, his voice deep and commanding. "Mr. Holbrook," he said evenly, "the Royal Design Council of Ashant was scheduled to finalize a custom collection contract today. This location was shortlisted as the exclusive design house for the project." The room stirred, a collective breath drawn but not released. Malik continued. "Her Highness was sent ahead in civilian attire to observe, unaided, the culture of your establishment before the final selection. The contract is valued at $750 million to be distributed over a 6-year design cycle, with global showcases, licensing rights, and full brand elevation privileges." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His every syllable sliced like a scalpel into the silence. "The deal was yours to lose," he added finally. And then, like a final nail in a coffin, he stepped back outside to rejoin the motorcade. The boutique was dead silent. Richard stood behind his counter as if rooted to the floor. His lips moved, but no words came. His mind raced through timelines, press releases, private lunches with international brokers, all now irrelevant. His body turned instinctively, almost involuntarily, toward the woman who had, just moments ago, stood before him holding out a black card he had mocked. Amara had not yet entered the car. She stood beside it, phone now tucked away, one gloved hand resting on the roof. She turned her head over her shoulder slightly, her voice carrying just enough to reach through the stillness. "I was prepared to sign today," she said, her tone composed, not cold. "Your name was already engraved on the first draft of the agreement." The room tilted on that sentence. Some staff gasped. One customer dropped a brochure. Richard inhaled sharply, his palms now slick against the countertop's polished stone. "But," Amara continued, turning slightly so he could see the clarity in her expression, "I believe you've already shown me everything I need to know." She didn't spit the words, didn't weaponize them. That would have been too easy. Instead, she simply told the truth. And the truth, in that moment, crushed more than any insult ever could. "I wanted to know what your legacy felt like without the filter of expectation," she said, softer now. "And I found out." Richard stepped forward, something desperate creeping into his voice now. "Wait, princess, I didn't know. You should have said something. This was a misunderstanding." Amara's eyes locked with his one last time. "It was clarity," she replied, "not misunderstanding." But their eyes no longer looked at jewelry. They looked at him, coldly, cautiously, some with disgust, others with disbelief. At 12:41 p.m., the first notification arrived. A subtle vibration from Lily's phone buzzed quietly on the counter as she rearranged a row of earrings. She glanced at the screen, her fingers freezing in place. Richard noticed and snapped irritably, "Stay focused. We're not done here." Lily didn't answer. She turned her screen toward him. There it was, a video posted to a popular social justice account on Instagram, nearly 3 minutes long, already amassing tens of thousands of views. The caption read, "Jewelry store owner mocks black woman, tells her she doesn't belong. Turns out she's royalty." In crisp high-definition quality, the store's own security footage revealed every word Richard had uttered. The mockery, the dismissal, the laughter about Uber drivers and sugar daddies. The moment Malik entered, the phrase "Princess Amara." The voiceover in the video explained it all with brutal clarity, layering screenshots of Richard's mocking face beneath bold text that read, $750 million, lost racism. By 1:30 p.m., the video had reached Twitter. By 2:15 p.m., it trended worldwide under hashtags like #HalbrookScandal, #LuxuryRacism, and #PrincessPower. Richard tried to contact the store's legal team, his PR agent, and even a few friends in the media, but each call went to voicemail or was met with tight, awkward replies. "This is bigger than spin," one publicist texted bluntly. "We're distancing." At 3:02 p.m., CNBC ran a breaking story. Royal family withdraws from Holbrook & Co. Partnership cites incompatibility with core values. The article was merciless. It detailed the failed deal, Richard's comments, and Amara's quiet composure in the face of humiliation. It included direct quotes from her final statement, as well as footage from the store corroborated by multiple witness testimonials, some of which came from Richard's own staff. Evan, the recently fired associate, had already given a statement. So had Lily, though she had asked for her name to be withheld. The damage was immediate and irreversible. By 4:15 p.m., Holbrook & Company began trending on LinkedIn, not as a success story, but as a cautionary tale. Executives and luxury brand insiders shared the video as an example of how not to treat clients in the modern marketplace. One viral post read, "He lost a global royal contract over a single glance and decades of arrogance." Celebrities began chiming in. Actress Solene Martin posted a screenshot of the video with the caption, "I wore Holbrook earrings to Cannes. Never again." Rapper Diaro tweeted, "750M deal gone, cause he couldn't hide his hate for 5 minutes? Man's ego cost him a kingdom." High-profile influencers began uploading videos where they cut up their Holbrook loyalty cards or donated previously purchased pieces to charity, calling it conscious cleansing. Richard's inbox filled with refund demands. Dozens of VIP clients, some of whom had been on waitlists for years, began pulling out. The most devastating blow landed at 5:22 p.m. when an anonymous source from within the Holbrook family holdings leaked internal memos revealing the board's emergency session that afternoon. They were preparing to vote on whether to remove Richard as CEO. The firm's parent company, Holbrook Luxury Group, saw its stock dip 18% by closing bell. Financial analysts called it the fastest brand devaluation in boutique jewelry history. Outside the boutique, reporters began gathering, their lenses pointed toward the windows. Flashbulbs burst every few minutes. A protester held up a handmade sign that read, "A black card means nothing if you're black." Inside, Richard stood behind the counter that had once made him feel untouchable, now surrounded by silence, shuttered displays, and the ever-growing storm he had created. Lily finally walked over, her voice quiet but steady. "You should know, sir," she said carefully. "I was the one who shared the footage, not to destroy you, but because the world needed to see what I saw." Richard didn't reply. By the next morning, The boutique on Madison Avenue that once shimmered with prestige looked more like the aftermath of a scandal than a symbol of luxury. The black velvet curtains were drawn shut, and a printed sign taped hastily to the glass door read, "Closed for inventory. By appointment only." But everyone knew what it meant. Inside, Richard sat alone in his office, surrounded not by diamonds or client files, but by printed headlines, cease and desist notices, and a phone that hadn't stopped ringing since dawn, not with support, but with fallout. At 9:14 a.m., his personal banker left a voicemail informing him that a freeze had been placed on several of his business accounts, pending legal review. At 9:47 a.m., the first official class action lawsuit was filed by 3 former clients who claimed they had witnessed discriminatory behavior within Holbrook and Company over the past 5 years and were now taking action, using the viral footage as evidence of a pattern. By noon, 6 more plaintiffs had joined. Richard's legal team advised him to shut down all operations immediately, including his private atelier in Geneva. His line of exclusive wedding pieces, scheduled to debut at the upcoming Paris Bridal Fair, was pulled without warning. Vogue canceled a pending feature. Harper's Bazaar replaced him with a younger designer from Milan. Behind the scenes, longtime investors began their retreat. One by one, they issued formal withdrawals, citing ethical misalignment and reputational risk. A report from Forbes titled "The Fastest Fall in Fine Jewelry" detailed how nearly 74% of Holbrook Luxury Group's capital backers had either pulled out or converted their holdings into liquidation clauses. Richard's net worth, once estimated at over $180 million, dropped by more than half in 2 days. And it didn't stop there. By the end of the week, his flagship boutique lease was under review by the property owner, who didn't want ongoing media attention tied to the building. The board of directors, once handpicked by Richard himself, held a private session and unanimously voted to remove him from all leadership roles. He was forced to sign over control of the company that had carried his family name for 3 generations. The Holbrook logo remained, but Richard's presence was officially erased from its foundation. Yet while Richard's world collapsed, others began to rise. Lily, the quiet associate who had leaked the footage, became a name whispered through corridors of power with a different kind of reverence. Talent scouts from Cartier, Van Cleef & Arpels, and Boucheron reached out within hours of her identity being confirmed. She didn't ask for attention, but she didn't shy away from it either. In interviews, she spoke softly, clearly never demonizing Richard, but never excusing him either. "When silence serves only the powerful," she said during a live CNN segment, "speaking out becomes its own kind of justice." Within weeks, Lily accepted an executive offer from a progressive design house in Los Angeles, where she was made director of ethical client relations, tasked with reshaping the very culture she had once suffered under. Evan, the young man Richard had fired, found himself at the center of public admiration. His calm but firm objection during the scandal was replayed across social media with captions like "He spoke when others stayed silent." He received a scholarship from a design institute in Paris, with full sponsorship and a paid mentorship under a leading black jewelry designer. For every brick that fell from Richard's empire, another foundation was laid elsewhere, this time in places built on courage, empathy, and truth. Meanwhile, Richard found himself shut out of his own legacy. Invitations to global design summits vanished. Celebrity clients who once called him darling now blocked his number. 12 months later, on a quiet corner in a modest suburb just outside Albany, a small storefront sat tucked between a florist and a dry cleaner. The hand-painted sign above its door read simply, "RH Fine Gifts." It wasn't flashy. The lettering had no gold trim. The windows weren't tinted to hide the interior, and the door chimed with an actual bell rather than an automated tone. Inside, the lighting was soft, the display cases humble, and the man behind the counter barely recognizable from the storm of headlines that once surrounded him. Richard Holbrook now wore no tailored suits, no cufflinks or Rolex watches. He wore a pressed button-up with rolled sleeves and stood silently polishing a glass case containing rings priced under $500. His hair had thinned, his frame had narrowed, and his voice, once commanding and clipped, had softened. Most of his days passed without mention of the past. The clients here didn't ask about high society or magazine features. They wanted engagement rings for young couples, gifts for anniversaries, small charms with real sentiment. Richard listened to each story, offered water to every guest, and never once spoke about the name Holbrook. He didn't need to. This was not reinvention. It was restitution. He came in early, left late, and kept a notebook under the register where he jotted down every name, every birthday, every memory a customer shared. He no longer built empires. He built trust. One afternoon, just before closing, the door swung open, and a girl no older than 12 stepped inside. Her shoes slightly muddy, her braids tight and shining with beads. She clutched a $10 bill in one hand and a small paper flower in the other. Richard looked up from the case and smiled gently. "Can I help you?" he asked. The girl nodded, but didn't speak immediately. She walked up to the counter and set down the money. "It's for my mom's birthday," she said shyly. "I want to buy her something pretty, like a ring. She wears a ring every day, but it broke. She never buys stuff for herself." Richard nodded slowly, then stepped from behind the counter and crouched to open a small drawer beneath one of the cases. He carefully removed a modest velvet box and placed it on the glass. Inside was a thin silver band with a single amethyst stone, a stone known not for price, but for meaning. The girl's eyes lit up. "That's her favorite color," she whispered. Richard didn't speak right away. He simply lifted the ring with a small pair of tongs, examined it closely, and nodded in satisfaction. Then he placed it in a tiny white box with a soft ribbon and handed it to the girl without taking the money. "No charge," he said gently. "It's from you to her. That's all that matters." The girl looked up confused. "But I saved," she insisted. "I saved for a month." Richard leaned forward and placed a hand over hers. "Listen to me," he said softly, eyes locking with hers. "No one, no matter what they look like, how they dress, or how much they bring, has the right to tell you what you're worth. Not ever. Do you understand?" The girl nodded slowly. Her lips trembled for a moment, then broke into a smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "She's gonna love it." As she turned to leave, Richard watched her step carefully down the street, hugging the box to her chest as if it carried the moon. When the door closed behind her, he stood for a long moment in silence, staring not at the cash register or the case of polished rings, but at the empty space where his past once lived. The weight of what he had done, what he had lost, never left him, but he had learned that true change doesn't scream. It whispers. It builds slowly, with each moment of dignity offered where once there had been judgment. Outside, the sky dimmed into a soft orange haze as the sun dipped behind the trees. Richard turned the sign on the door to closed, swept the floor carefully, and then reached beneath the counter for his notebook. He flipped to a fresh page, dated it in the corner, and wrote. Her name was Elise. Amethyst for her mother. Paid in courage. Then he closed the book, dimmed the lights, and walked out into the evening. No security, no title, no empire. Just a man, a shop, and a lesson finally learned. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful narratives that reveal deeper truths beneath the surface. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it the final redemption, or the moment everything fell apart? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel.